Hey everyone, my name is Nick. Welcome back to another episode of Comic Culture. Today we're going to go over how I went from never reading comics to having a collection like this. Who doesn't like a good origin story, right? So this is my origin story of how I got into comics. Stay tuned. So we're going to go over how I got into collecting comics. We'll start from the very beginning, see what I was interested in, what got me into the door, how my opinions and views and tastes evolved over time, and then kind of catch up to where we are now. So let's get into it. I was kind of a late bloomer when it came to comics. I didn't get into comics until I was almost 30 years old. I don't remember my older brothers reading comics when I was a kid. My friends didn't have any comic books that I remember. I don't remember seeing them at the stores or convenience stores, grocery stores growing up, so they just weren't a part of my life. But I was always into superheroes. I loved the Batman movies growing up, really into the X-Men animated series and the Batman animated series growing up, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joes, Transformers, things like that, but it never really translated into print. And I think like a lot of us, once the MCU started taking off and those movies became more popular, it really piqued the interest of a lot of people. Combine that with shows like The Walking Dead, and you can really see how the source material for all this great entertainment was really the platform for my transformation. This is Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash, #1. So why did I get this one? I remember being at the Nashville Tattoo and Horror Convention almost a decade ago now, and I am absolutely in love with the Ash character. I love Evil Dead, Army of Darkness, and so that's the first thing that caught my eye. And who wouldn't want to see a battle between Freddy, Jason, and Ash, right? I mean, that's kind of like a dream. There was two guys at the table when I picked this book up. I didn't know who they were at the time. I didn't register with me that they were possibly the writer and the artist or whoever else. And I approached the table and I said, "Hey, I really like that book. It's, looks really interesting." And so they sold me the book and they said, "Do you want me to autograph it?" I said, "Sure." So they both signed it, and the signatures are down there. This is the J. Scott Campbell cover. You could probably recognize that, but he did not sign the book. He may have been there, but I have no idea. I didn't even know who he was at the time. But that's a pretty cool find that I didn't realize until maybe a couple years ago. I've been sitting on this book for a long time. I had a J. Scott Campbell cover, and he possibly could have been there to sign it, and I never got him to sign it. So maybe I'll find him one day and have him autograph it for me. So that was the end of my comic book collecting career, so I thought. I had no intention on going to the stores and picking up more books. I was just attracted to this particular one, so that's what I got. But as time went on, there was a AMC show that was getting more and more popular that me and my wife were watching every single week, and that was The Walking Dead. So I remember hearing over time that The Walking Dead TV show was actually a comic book first. And hey, when you're not reading comics, you don't know these things. You don't realize that the source material was from comics. So I remember watching the first couple seasons of Walking Dead, kind of understanding more about, what the story is and who these characters are, and realizing that it was a book first, a comic book first. So I was more and more curious about the differences in the story, because I heard people saying, "Oh, that's not how it happened in the comic," or "the comic is better," or "the TV show did that particular scene better." So I was really interested on, seeing what the difference was between the books. And so I don't remember how many issues Walking Dead was in at that point, but I bought this hardcover because it has the first several issues, and I just like a hardcover book. And I remember just really being blown away. I think it was good that I saw the show first because I kind of had these characters' attitudes and voices in my head already, so I can apply them to the characters in the comic book. That just kind of helped me not have to figure that out myself in my head. And I think they did a great job with the casting overall on the show. And I also love the fact that they took some of the most iconic panels from the book and they put them in the TV show. So I remember I really wanted to catch up to the show. And then once I caught up to the show, I blew past it, kept on reading, and then got up to the current issues of The Walking Dead, which I think there was probably 30 or 40 issues left by the time I kind of got caught up. But this is what really kind of got me into binge reading comics. I went from a single issue to a hardcover, and then I went from one hardcover to 15. And so I went through and blasted through all 15 of these, and it was an absolute delight. So that was perfect for me. So that was how I went from one comic to many trades. Around that same time, I started looking out and seeing what else was going on, and I noticed that The Watchman was out as well. So I watched the movie first, and then I found the book, and I loved it. I loved seeing all the differences. Again, it was that experience of reading it versus watching it on screen. And I absolutely love the differences. And this kind of sparked my interest in other kinds of comic books. As you can tell so far, I'm not really into superhero stuff. I liked all that stuff when I was a kid, watching the animated shows of pretty much everything and watching the different movies that are coming out around that time. But I haven't really gotten into the comic book version of the superhero stuff yet. So coming off of Watchmen, the MCU movies were starting to pick up a lot of steam. More and more people were interested. A lot of people were asking who these characters were, if they weren't really in the know, if they haven't been following comics, for the last 30 years. I kind of wanted to get into the comic book scene. And so I went to my local comic book shop, which is the Outer Limits in Franklin, Tennessee. And I was just looking around and, just trying to find some, flipping through the dollar books, trying to find some characters that I at least recognized. And I came across a book that I'm sure nobody else has. It's extremely rare. It's a first issue collector's item with a trading card included. Official Marvel superhero trading card enclosed, available only with this collector's edition. So you're not going to find it anywhere else. I promise you. I wouldn't lie. And it's still sealed, guys. It's X-Force #1. And is this my particular, look at that silly Deadpool card that was selling for $1,000 a couple months ago. So X-Force #1. So I picked up X-Force #1 because I thought Cable was an extremely interesting character, and we all know he is. His backstory is extremely complicated and hard to kind of walk through. I picked him up because he looked awesome on that cover. I mean, come on, why wouldn't you pick that up? The other thing I noticed was that X-Force was in the dollar bins everywhere. So if I was going to get introduced to a character or to a series, I could start with X-Force. I could pick up dozens and dozens of issues and string them all together and see if I can put together a storyline. What better way to start than to start with a cheap, easily available, and good storyline with characters you recognize. And it's kind of like X-Men, which I was into in the movies. So it was a win-win for me. After I was reading this, I got into X-Factor a little bit, started getting into the old X-Men, the Uncanny X-Men run. And so I'm still piecing those together, as you might see in previous videos when I go dollar bin diving at the stores. So X-Force was really my introduction into Marvel. I'm still trying to put together the full run. I have the majority of them now, missing a couple dozen here and there. But I'm really glad that I got on board with this particular one because it was a fun ride and it gives me an introduction into Marvel Comics, and this is where it kind of blows out into the superhero realm. So around the time I'm picking up all my X-Force copies, I see a poster at my comic book store for a big new event in DC. This event was called DC Rebirth. I had no idea what DC Rebirth was at the time. I've heard of the New 52. I was seeing it on the shelves, but I figured, hey, there's already, 45 plus issues of these ongoing series there. That's probably not a great place to start reading. Rebirth is coming. Let me finish, picking up a bunch of old books, figuring out what I like, and then I'll jump on board with Rebirth. So I went ahead and pretty much ordered every first issue of all the different series that were coming out in Rebirth. And then over time, 5, 6, 7, 8 issues in, I kind of narrowed down my reading list to just a few different characters. So it was kind of fate in a way, because I remember seeing also posters for a square off between Dr. Manhattan and Superman. And so I already was in love with the Watchmen. I read the book. I was watching the movies. How is Dr. Manhattan and Superman ever going to meet? How are they going to fight? What's going to happen? Are the other Watchmen going to come on? Minutemen come on? Is the Justice League going to start fighting them? What is this? What is this craziness, right? And so that kind of piqued my interest even more for a particular run, which was Batman and Flash. So around issue 21, we started to kind of get this tease of the Button. And so the Button is the comedian from the Watchmen's little button. It's that smiley face, that iconic smiley face you might recognize in my icon. And I was kind of blown away at the concept of these two universes merging and how they were going to pull that off. Now we can debate whether or not it worked or not, especially when Doomsday Clock is involved. But it was a cool combination of universes, I thought. So I really had a good time with this particular run. It kind of faded off after a while after Doomsday Clock came out, which honestly took forever to publish. I think it was over a year for 12 issues to finally publish. I think that's what kind of killed the momentum of that particular event. But it was kind of the merging between Batman, who I loved from my childhood, the Watchmen, who I loved from more recent times and getting into comic books. So it was a perfect combination of interests for me to kind of keep me going and to pick up more comics. So I kept on going with Batman from issue 1 all the way up to the most recent issues. And I absolutely love the story. They since dropped the Watchmen connection, but that's perfectly fine. The stories are great. Joker's been an amazing villain the past couple dozen issues, and I'm really looking forward to Infinite Frontier. All right, so now we kind of gotten into the superhero world a little bit. We're getting into Batman, and I'm noticing a problem when I'm in Marvel books and DC books. The problem I'm noticing is, unless you have a good memory of the last several decades, you're going to miss some of the tropes and you're going to miss some of the details that you might see in these books. They might introduce a character we haven't seen in comics for 15 years. And so the impact for me was minimal. But if you have been reading and following this whole time, you might think that's the greatest thing in the world because that was maybe your favorite character. And they were kind of doing this more and more, which is great, bringing back old characters, not using the same ones over and over again. But I was kind of missing out. So that was a little bit annoying at the time. And it kind of explains why I went into this other direction. And what I mean is I started noticing that the other side of the new release wall at my comic book store had a bunch of books that weren't Marvel or DC. They weren't faces I've seen before. They were from publishers like Image, Boom, AWA, Aftershock, things like that. And they were characters in series that I've never even heard of. And so I wanted to really kind of try it out. So I go home and Google, top 5 Image books or top 5 Boom books, something like that, to kind of give me what's the best of this other world. So when you Google some of the best Image books out there, one book is always going to be on the top few results. And that book is Saga. When I got into Saga, the series was about to be wrapped up. I think there was only 3 or 4 issues left in the current run. And so I jumped on and grabbed those. And so I had to go back and get trades or get digital copies of the full run. And I kind of binged that whole thing. I had been used to binging through Walking Dead and reading Watchmen and catching up on Batman and things like that. So by then my binge skills were pretty good. So I remember going through Saga, and that kind of blew my mind because, again, I didn't start with superheroes in comics, which is kind of what comic books are known for, I would say, if you're not into comics. And then I transitioned into superheroes, and then I went into something like Saga. So to me, that you couldn't be any more polar opposite, right? Going from Batman to Saga. So I really, really, really enjoyed how Saga expanded my expectations of what a comic book could be, if that makes sense. It's not just about brooding superheroes that were forged from tragedy, and they're fighting the bad guy who was also forged from tragedy. And, it's that never-ending battle that they've been doing for 50 years. These books expanded the universe, expanded the expectations of what comics could do, and really kind of opened my eyes to, hey, there's really good quality content out there that's not superhero related necessarily. So why don't I explore that some more? So I remember going from books like Saga, getting into other independent books, really kind of exploring what else was out there. But the next big book that kind of caught my interest in this same kind of vein, and I wish I had an actual number 1 of it, but it was Ice Cream Man. So Ice Cream Man is very interesting. It's essentially a shared universe of all these tragic experiences. And you see a little overlap here and there, but it's not like the characters all know each other issue from issue to issue. The villain in the book is kind of like the devil in a way. He influences, he interacts with different people, manipulates them, and there's always some kind of a unique tragedy at the end. And it's actually pretty brilliant, I think. If you're hearing that Ice Cream Man is one of the best books out there and you're still kind of on the fence, don't know if you're into it, just kind of ask yourself, are you into more superhero type stuff, or do you want to branch out and kind of see what else comic books can offer? Ice Cream Man's been extremely interesting to me. I absolutely love the different covers on here, the different stories, the connected yet not connected universe. It brings you in. You can read a one-off story. You can feel however you want to feel about that story. And then you can kind of put it down and you can read the next one without having read the first one. So it's really, really good if you're trying to get into comic books and you don't want that superhero experience. You want that more existential feeling. So I would highly recommend Ice Cream Man if you're not into it now. So I'll end with probably my favorite book in my collection right now. And there's a little bit of a story behind this one as well. I remember back in 2017, I was able to go to Wizard World here in Nashville, Tennessee. Wizard World is a comic book convention. They have a lot of artists. I'm sure you might have a Wizard World in your area, or you used to before the pandemic. And this particular Wizard World was really good because Stan Lee was going to be there. This was obviously prior to his death. He was extremely weak though, but he was going to be there for a signing. And so I really, really wanted to go. And I didn't know what to bring. I didn't have anything old. All my books were, 90s or newer. I was starting to get a lot of independent books. I didn't really have any kind of like iconic covers. I understood what characters he created and the storylines behind them. And so I tried to find a book that I felt encompassed as many different elements as I could for him to sign. So what I came up with was a X-Men number 35, the Along Came a Spider cover. And this cover to me kind of encompasses everything. It has the X-Men who he created. It has Spider-Man who he also created. And it's kind of their face-off. It teases the battle between these two teams, right? So I couldn't be happier with the selection that I made personally for him to sign. Meeting him was a pleasure. It was quite a long wait, as you can imagine. And he was kind of at a state where things were just kind of pushed towards him, and then he would sign it. He might look up at you and smile and say thanks, and then that was pretty much it. But they were handing him pens and handing him comics to sign. So it was a little bit sad to see him in that state, but he did look up and smile, and you could tell that he at least appreciated everyone's excitement. The panel that he had was pretty interesting too. He was able to answer a lot of questions and kind of joke around with the audience. So that was really fun for me to experience, and I got it graded, and here it is. So it's probably my favorite comic of my collection. It's that one I'd grab if the place was on fire. And so that is this one. So that's how I got into comic books. It started with one innocent comic from a tattoo and horror convention show, and it ends up with me owning nearly 1,000 copies and getting books every week, and now talking to you guys about comic books. So I think it's pretty interesting. I love origin stories. I want to know what your origin story is. Go in the comments below and let me know. We all have a different story. We all got here in different ways. I'd be really interested to hear what you got to say. And while you're in the comments, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and hit that bell notification that lets you know when I go live with a new video. Thanks again for listening to my origin story. You guys have a great day. Thanks. I'm going to have a hell of a time editing this thing. Good luck, future Nick. I don't want to be you. I'd hate to be that guy.